copper chalice slipped from Lyra's fingers before she could stop it. Time stretched. The vessel tumbled through the torch-lit air of Stonehaven's great hall, spilling dark wine like arterial spray across the granite floor. 300 nobles turned as one, their winter furs and velvet gowns rustling in unified judgment. The musicians in the gallery fell silent, mid-note their strings whining into nothing. Lyra's knees hit the stone. Shards of shattered bronze bit through her thin servant's dress, but she barely felt them. What she felt was the wetness spreading across her right wrist, warm and insistent. A jagged piece of the chalice's decorative rim had opened her flesh from palm to forearm. Blood welled up in a thick, dark line, then began to run. She pressed her left hand over the wound, but the pressure only made it worse. Blood seeped between her fingers, dripping onto the floor in fat, deliberate drops. The sound they made seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Drip, drip, drip. Lady Isolde stood 3 feet away, one delicate hand still raised from where she had extended her foot. The hem of her deep blue velvet gown was spotless. Her blonde hair caught the candlelight like spun gold. She tilted her head with an expression of carefully crafted concern, the kind that didn't quite reach her ice-pale eyes. "Oh dear," Isolde said, her voice carrying across the hall with a crystalline clarity. "How terribly clumsy!" The nobles murmured. Heads turned toward the high table where the council lords sat in their carved chairs like crows on a fence. At the center, Lord Castellan rose slowly, his silver beard catching the firelight. At 65, he moved with the careful dignity of a man who had spent decades building power, one whispered threat at a time. "Remove the Omega," Castellan said. His voice was not loud, but it didn't need to be. Authority lived in every syllable. "She has disrupted the winter solstice feast. Take her to the lower cells until morning, when we shall decide her punishment." 2 guards in leather and chainmail moved toward Lyra. She didn't look up. She knew this dance. Keep your head down. Make yourself small. Survive until tomorrow, and then the day after that, and the day after that. 112 silver pieces saved. Only 38 more until she could buy her way across the northern border into the free territories. Just 38 pieces of silver between her and a life where no one would know her name or the debt she supposedly owed. The guards were 5 feet away when the air in the Great Hall changed. It didn't grow colder. It grew heavier. The torches flickered despite the lack of wind, their flames bending towards something at the far end of the hall. Every wolf in the room felt it, a pressure that started at the base of the skull and spread down the spine like electricity. The instinct was immediate and ancient. A predator had entered the room, and it was deciding whether to feed. Lyra looked up. AlphaKing Theron stood at the head table, both hands flat on the scarred oak surface. He was not a man who drew the eye through ornament or ceremony. He wore black leather and dark wool, his only concession to the feast a heavy fur cloak that fell from his shoulders like a shadow-given weight. His hair was black and long enough to brush his collar, and his face carried the kind of scars that came from fighting with teeth and claws, not ceremonial blades. For 10 years he had ruled the northern territories with absolute authority and almost complete silence. He did not attend social gatherings. He did not make small talk with visiting nobles. He did not smile or laugh or show interest in anything that did not directly concern the defense of his borders or the governance of his lands. The servants called him the Silent Storm. The warriors called him something else, usually in whispers, usually with the kind of respect that bordered on religious fear. Lyra had seen him exactly 347 times in the 3 years she had worked in Stonehaven Fortress. She had counted. It was something to do during the 16-hour days of scrubbing floors and hauling water and trying not to be noticed. She knew that he took his morning meal alone in his chambers. She knew he walked the battlements at dawn and dusk. She knew he trained with his second Garrett every afternoon in the south courtyard, and that when he fought, he moved like water made lethal. She also knew that he had never once looked directly at her. Kings did not look at servants. Alphas did not acknowledge Omegas. The hierarchy was absolute, carved into the foundation of their world as deeply as the stone beneath Stonehaven's walls, which was why the entire hall seemed to stop breathing when Theron stepped down from the high table and began to walk toward her. His boots made no sound on the stone. He moved with the fluid, unhurried grace of a wolf who had already calculated every angle of attack and found no threat worth acknowledging. The crowd parted without anyone consciously deciding to move. They simply melted away from his path, creating a corridor of empty space between the high table and the growing pool of Lyra's blood. 30 feet, 20, 10. The guards who had been approaching Lyra took 3 rapid steps backward. One of them made a small sound in his throat, something between a whimper and a question. Theron reached her and stopped. For a long moment he simply stood there looking down. Lyra kept her eyes on the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. She could smell him now, the scent cutting through the wine and wood smoke and perfume nobility. Pine smoke and rain on stone, and something else, something sharp and electric, like the air just before a thunderstorm broke. Then Theron knelt. The sound that went through the great hall was not quite a gasp and not quite a moan. It was the collective exhale of 300 people witnessing something that should not be possible. AlphaKing Theron, who knelt for no one, who bent his neck to no authority on earth, was on his knees in a pool of servant blood. He reached out with hands that could break a man's spine and took Lyra's bleeding wrist with a gentleness that bordered on reverence. His fingers were warm. They trembled very slightly as they turned her arm to examine the wound. Lyra finally looked up. His eyes were not brown. They were amber, the deep golden color of honey held up to sunlight, and they were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her lungs forget how to pull air. This close, she could see the faint scars that ran along his jaw, the way his pupils had contracted to pinpoints, the muscle jumping in his cheek as he clenched his jaw hard enough to crack teeth. His nostrils flared. He inhaled once deeply and his entire body went rigid. The scent hit the room like a physical force. Rain on mountainstone, night-blooming jasmine, clean and wild and utterly impossible to ignore. It poured off Lyra in waves no longer masked by the lavender ash she rubbed into her skin every morning, no longer buried under the smell of lye soap and kitchen grease. 3 years of suppression burned away in an instant by pain and fear and the presence of something her wolf recognized, even if her conscious mind did not. Theron's eyes flashed pure gold, not amber, not brown, gold bright and burning and absolutely inhuman. He slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back. The movement was so smooth it seemed choreographed, as if he had done this 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different lives. He lifted her against his chest, cradling her like something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. Lyra's bleeding wrist pressed against the dark leather of his tunic, staining it. She tried to pull away, tried to warn him that she was ruining his clothes, but his grip tightened fractionally and the words died in her throat. Theron stood. He turned to face the great hall. Lyra held against his chest, and for the first time in 10 years of absolute rule, he spoke loudly enough for every person in the room to hear. Mine. One word, single syllable, absolute and final as a blade through the heart. The hall exploded into chaos. Nobles surged to their feet, voices rising in a cacophony of shock and speculation. Lord Castellan's face had gone the color of old parchment. Isolde stood frozen, her perfectly painted mouth hanging open in a very unladylike expression of horror. Theron did not acknowledge any of it. He simply turned and walked toward the massive oak doors at the far end of the hall, carrying Lyra as if she weighed nothing at all. The crowd scrambled to clear his path. Servants pressed themselves against the walls. Guards saluted and then immediately looked away, as if afraid that meeting his eyes would invite death. They reached the doors. Theron kicked them open without breaking stride, the iron-bound oak slamming against the stone walls hard enough to crack the hinges. Then they were in the corridor beyond, surrounded by flickering torchlight and sudden ringing silence. Lyra's head spun. Blood loss, maybe. Shock, certainly. She tried to focus on something, anything that would anchor her to reality. She found herself staring at the place where her blood had soaked into Theron's tunic, the dark stain spreading across his chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I'm ruining your clothes." Theron's arms tightened around her just a fraction. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, barely more than a growl. "You think I care about cloth?" They climbed. Lyra lost track of how many stairs, how many corridors. Stonehaven was a vertical fortress built into the mountain itself, and the royal chambers sat at the very top of the central keep. 7 floors up, 7 flights of spiral staircases, each one narrower than the last. Theron took them at a steady pace, his breathing never changing, his grip never loosening. They passed servants who flattened themselves against the walls. They passed guards who saluted and immediately found somewhere else to be. No one spoke. No one asked questions. The sight of their king carrying a bleeding Omega was apparently sufficient explanation for anything. The royal wing smelled different, cleaner. The torches here burned with expensive oil that didn't smoke, and the floors were polished smooth rather than rough-hewn. Lyra had been in this section of the fortress exactly twice in 3 years, both times to help carry furniture for one of Isolde's redecorating projects. She was not supposed to be here. Servants who entered the royal chambers uninvited had a tendency to disappear. Theron shouldered open a heavy wooden door and carried her into a room that was larger than the entire servant quarters. A fire roared in a hearth big enough to stand in, Furs covered the floor in thick layers. The bed against the far wall was massive, its posts carved from dark wood and hung with heavy velvet curtains. He set her down on a chair near the fire, finally releasing his grip. Lyra immediately tried to stand a curtsy, to do something that acknowledged the absolutely insane breach of protocol that was happening, but Theron put one hand on her shoulder and pressed her back down with effortless strength. "Stay!" It was not a request. He turned and strode to the door, yanking it open. Three guards stood in the hallway beyond, hands on sword hilts, clearly uncertain whether they should be protecting their king or protecting themselves from him. "Get out," Theron said. "All of you. Clear this entire floor. I don't want to see or smell another soul until I call for one." The guards saluted and fled. Theron slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame, then turned back to Lyra. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then he crossed to a cabinet against the wall, moving with barely controlled violence. He yanked open drawers, pulling out clean linen bandages, a ceramic bowl, a silver flask. His movements were too sharp, too fast. He was holding himself together through sheer force of will, and Lyra could see the cracks forming in his legendary control. He filled the bowl with water from a pitcher, then returned to her chair and knelt again. This time there was no audience, no witnesses. Just the two of them and the firelight and the scent of rain and jasmine filling the air, until it felt hard to breathe. Theron took her wounded wrist in both hands. His fingers shook, actually trembled, visible tremors running through the hands that could crush stone. He stared at the blood still welling from the gash, his jaw working silently. "Who did this?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow more terrifying for its softness. Lyra didn't answer, couldn't answer. The truth would only make things worse. Theron's eyes lifted to hers. Gold met gray blue, and Lyra felt something in her chest twist and pull like a hook sinking into her sternum. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "And I need you to understand that your answer matters, not because I need permission to act. I will find the truth regardless. But I am giving you the chance to claim your own justice. So I will ask again, who did this to you?" His thumb brushed across the unmarked skin of her inner wrist just above the wound. The touch was feather-light, gentle beyond reason, and it broke something inside Lyra that 3 years of abuse had not managed to crack. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I'm no one. Omega-7 from the lower kitchens. You can't, people will talk. Lord Castellan will be furious. You claimed me in front of the entire court. I know what I did. But I'm nothing. I'm a debt servant. You are not nothing." The words came out as a growl vibrating from somewhere deep in his chest. "And you owe no one anything. Not anymore." He dipped a strip of linen in the water and began cleaning the blood from her arm. His hands had steadied, now moving with careful precision. He worked in silence, washing away the dried blood, examining the wound with the focused attention of a healer or a warrior assessing damage. Lyra watched his face. This close, she could see details she had never noticed during her 347 distant glimpses. The faint scar that ran through his left eyebrow, the way his hair fell forward to hide the marks on his throat, the absolute concentration in his expression, as if cleaning a servant's wound was the most important task he had ever undertaken. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Theron didn't look up. "Why what? Why did you do that in the hall? You could have just let them take me. You should have let them take me. Now everyone will think they'll say that you let them say whatever they want." He wrapped clean bandages around her wrist, his fingers steady and sure. "I stopped caring about court gossip approximately 10 years ago. But Lord Castellan can choke on his own tongue for all I care." Theron tied off the bandage with a neat knot, then finally met her eyes again. "Do you know how long I've been watching you?" The question hit like a physical blow. Lyra shook her head mutely. 2 years, 4 months, 17 days. His voice was perfectly calm, reciting facts. "The first time I saw you, you were carrying a basket of linens through the great hall. You were humming something under your breath, some old song. You didn't see me, you never saw me. You kept your head down and your eyes on the floor, and you moved through my fortress like a ghost." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed against her hair, tucking a strand behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle it made her throat ache. "I started counting," he continued. "Every time you passed through a room I was in, every time I caught your scent in a corridor. 347 times. I know you always pull your hair to the right side. I know you prefer the night shifts because fewer people are awake to bother you. I know you hide your left hand because of the scar on your wrist, the burn scar. Lyra's breath caught. She had been so careful. She always kept her left hand tucked into her apron or hidden in her sleeves. How could he possibly? Theron's expression hardened. His eyes dropped to her left wrist where the bandage didn't quite cover the old burn mark. The scar was shaped like a handprint red and twisted, the kind of mark that came from boiling water held against skin for too long. Who? He asked again. This time his voice had gone very quiet, very cold. Tell me who put that mark on you, Lyra. She jerked back, startled. How do you know my name? I asked. His eyes lifted to hers again, and there was something raw in them now, something that looked almost like pain. 2 years ago, I asked Iris what your name was. She told me Omega-7. I asked again. I told her I needed your actual name for records. She looked it up. Lyra of House Silvermane. Debt servant assigned to kitchen and laundry rotation. Contract term 15 years. He said her house name like a prayer, like something sacred. Silvermane, he repeated softly. The White Wolf bloodline. I thought that line was extinct. Lyra's heart stopped. She stared at him, unable to form words, unable to breathe. No one was supposed to know. Castellan had made sure of that. She was Omega-7, a nobody, a servant too worthless to carry a surname. Theron saw the panic in her face and his expression gentled fractionally. It's all right, he said. I won't tell anyone. Your secrets are safe, but I need you to understand something. He took both of her hands in his, careful of the bandaged wrist. His skin was warm, impossibly warm. The touch sent electricity racing up her arms. I have been alone for a very long time, Theron said quietly. 10 years since I took the crown, 5 years since the shadow poisoning. Every day the wolf inside me gets harder to control. Louder. Angrier. My healers tell me I have maybe 6 months before I go feral. 6 months before I become the monster everyone already thinks I am. He drew in a shaking breath. And then tonight you fell. You bled. And your scent hit me like a warhammer to the chest. His eyes flashed gold again. Rain on mountain stone. Night blooming jasmine. The first thing I've been able to smell properly in 5 years. The first thing that's made my wolf quiet instead of rage. His grip tightened on her hands. So when I knelt in that hall, when I claimed you in front of 300 witnesses, I wasn't being impulsive. I wasn't making a political statement. I was acknowledging the only true thing I've felt since the poison started eating my soul. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. You are mine, and I am yours. And I will burn this entire fortress to ash before I let anyone take you from me. Lyra couldn't speak, couldn't think. The words were too big, too impossible. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her. Kings didn't kneel for servants. Alphas didn't claim Omegas who spent their days scrubbing floors and hiding scars. Except he had. He did. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall, the first of the winter season. Somewhere far below, the winter solstice feast was probably still in chaos. Nobles arguing and servants gossiping, and Lord Castellan plotting whatever revenge he thought he could manage. But up here in the firelight, with Theron's hands warm around hers and his scent wrapping around her like a physical thing, Lyra felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Safe. The word was foreign. Dangerous. She knew better than to trust it. Safety was an illusion for people like her. Safety was what you thought you had right before everything was ripped away. But Theron was looking at her like she was something precious, like she mattered. And the wolf inside her, the one she had spent 12 years suppressing with poison and prayer, stirred for the first time in longer than she could remember. It didn't howl. It didn't rage. It whispered one word. Mate. Lyra woke to unfamiliar softness. For 3 years, she had slept on a straw pallet in the servant quarters, a space she shared with 11 other Omegas. The room was always cold, always damp, always smelling of unwashed bodies and desperation. She had learned to sleep light, to wake at the first sound of footsteps, to be dressed and moving before the dawn bell rang. This was not that place. She opened her eyes to fur. Thick, dark pelts layered over what felt like an actual mattress, the kind stuffed with wool and feathers instead of mildewed straw. The pillow beneath her head was soft enough to sink into. The blanket covering her was heavy and warm, woven from material that didn't scratch or smell like mold. Memory returned in fragments. The feast, the blood, Theron kneeling in front of 300 witnesses, his voice rough and absolute mine. Lyra sat up too quickly. The room spun. Her right wrist throbbed dully beneath clean bandages, and when she looked down, she realized someone had changed her clothes. The thin servant's dress was gone. In its place, she wore a soft linen nightgown that fell to her ankles, clean and white, and absolutely not something that belonged to her. Panic set in. She was in the king's chambers, in his bed, wearing clothes that someone, Theron, a servant, had put on her while she was unconscious. Every rule she had learned, every survival instinct she had honed, screamed that she needed to leave immediately. Before he woke, before anyone saw, before this impossible situation became somehow worse. Lyra slid out of the bed as quietly as she could. Her bare feet hit fur rugs, then cold stone. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, casting the room in shades of gray and amber. Early morning light filtered through the narrow window, painting frost patterns across the glass. She took 2 steps toward the door before a voice stopped her. "Going somewhere?" Lyra spun. Theron sat in a chair near the window, so still she hadn't noticed him in the dim light. He was dressed in the same black leather and wool from the night before, though he'd removed the fur cloak. His hair was loose around his shoulders. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "I should—" Lyra's voice came out as a rasp. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I should get back to the servant quarters before the morning bell. I have duties. The kitchen fires need to be lit and no." One word, final as a door slamming shut. Lyra stared at him. "My lord, I don't think you understand. If I'm not there when Iris does the morning count, I'll be reported. And if Lord Castellan finds out I spent the night in that he'll think, I don't care what Castellan thinks." Theron stood unfolding from the chair with that liquid grace that made him seem more wolf than man. "And you're not going back to the servant quarters. Ever." The words hung in the air between them. "I have to," Lyra said. She heard the desperation creeping into her voice and hated it. "I'm under contract. 15 years of service to pay my father's debt. I still have 12 years left. If I break the terms, Castellan can have me outlawed. Hunted. He can— Your father's debt." Theron crossed the room, stopping just far enough away that she didn't feel trapped, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Tell me about this debt." Lyra's hands twisted in the hem of the nightgown. 4,200 gold crowns. "My father, Lord Aldrich of House Silvermane, he borrowed money from Lord Castellan 15 years ago. For the estate, for repairs after the fire in the West Wing. When he died, the debt passed to me. Castellan gave me a choice work as a servant for 15 years, or he'd claim Silvermane lands in payment. And you believed him." It wasn't a question. Theron's voice was carefully neutral, but something dark moved behind his eyes. "I was 7 years old," Lyra said quietly. "I didn't know what else to do. Castellan was my father's friend. He said he would take care of everything. He said the work would be light, just until the debt was settled. And instead, he worked you 16 hours a day for 3 years and called you to by a number instead of your name." Lyra looked away. "It's not that bad." "Show me your hands." She tucked them behind her back automatically. "My lord." "Show me." It was an alpha command weighted with power that made her wolf whimper and submit. Lyra's hands came forward without her conscious permission. Theron caught them, gently turning them over to examine her palms. The calluses were thick and yellow. Chemical burns from lye soap pocked her fingers. Her knuckles were split and raw from scrubbing stone floors. Her nails were broken down to the quick. Theron's jaw tightened. He traced one finger across her palm, following the lines of scar tissue. "Not that bad," he repeated softly. Then he looked up, and his eyes had gone full gold. "What else did they do to you?" "Nothing." "Lyra." "It's fine. I'm fine. It's just work. Everyone in the servant quarters has hands like this. It's normal. Show me your left wrist." Her breath caught. "You already saw it. Last night. It's just an old burn. It happened years ago. It's nothing." "Who burned you?" The air in the room had changed. The temperature seemed to drop. Theron sent pine smoke and rain, and ozone intensified until it was almost overwhelming. Lyra pulled her hands free and wrapped her arms around herself. "It was an accident. I was careless. I wasn't paying attention and— the truth." She closed her eyes. "Lady Isolde, a year and a half ago, she said I looked at her wrong. She was boiling linens in the laundry. She grabbed my wrist and held it over the pot until I apologized." The sound that came from Theron was not human. It was a growl that started deep in his chest and reverberated through the stone floor. When Lyra opened her eyes, he had turned away from her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His shoulders shook with the effort of holding himself still. "Theron." He held up one hand, a clear signal. "Don't come closer. Don't speak. Give me a moment." Lyra watched him fight for control. The air around him seemed to shimmer. She could have sworn she saw dark fur ripple across his shoulders before he forced it back down. When he finally turned around, his eyes were still gold, but his voice was steady. "I'm going to ask you a question," he said, "and I need you to answer honestly. Not what you think I want to hear, not what's safe, the truth." Lyra nodded slowly. "Do you want to stay here, in these chambers, under my protection, or do you want to leave?" The question was so unexpected that she actually laughed. The sound came out sharp and slightly hysterical. "Want, my lord, what I want doesn't matter. I'm a debt servant. I don't get to want things." "You do now." He took a step toward her, just one, his movements careful, controlled. "As of this moment, you are under my direct authority, not Castellan's, oh, not the council's, mine, which means you have choices. So I'm asking, what do you want?" What did she want? She wanted her father back. She wanted the last 15 years to have never happened. She wanted to wake up in Silvermane Manor with clean hands and no scars and the simple, thoughtless freedom of childhood. But those wants were fairy tales, impossible wishes. "I want to not be afraid all the time," she heard herself say. "I want to stop flinching every time someone walks past me. I want to sleep without wondering if I'm going to wake up to Isolde with another knife or another pot of boiling water. I want—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, fighting back the burn in her throat. "I want to matter," she finished quietly. "Just once, I want to be something other than Omega-7 who scrubs floors and stays invisible and counts silver pieces in the dark." Theron crossed the remaining distance between them. This time when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. He cupped her face in both hands, tilting her head up until she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "You matter to me," he said. "You have mattered to me since the first time I saw you. And I swear to you on my crown and my name and the wolf in my blood, no one will ever hurt you again." Before Lyra could respond, someone knocked on the door. Theron's head snapped toward the sound. "I said clear the floor." "My king." The voice from the other side was familiar. Garrett Theron's second. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but we have a situation. The council has convened an emergency session. Lord Castellan is demanding your presence. He's invoked the right of address." Theron's hands dropped from Lyra's face. He stepped back, and for a moment the civilized king disappeared entirely. What looked at the door was pure predator. "Tell Castellan he can wait." "My lord, he's brought documentation. He's claiming breach of contract. He says the Omega belongs to him by legal right, and your actions last night constitute theft of bonded property." The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began to form on the window glass. "Garrett," Theron said, his voice deadly calm, "tell me very carefully, did Castellan just call her property?" A pause. "Yes, my king." "I'll be down in 10 minutes. Have the council assembled in the Great Hall. All of them. And Garrett," "Yes, my king. If Castellan tries to leave before I get there, break his legs." Silence from the other side of the door. Then understood. Footsteps retreated down the corridor. Theron turned back to Lyra. The gold had bled from his eyes, leaving them dark amber, but she could see the wolf pacing just beneath his skin. "I need you to stay here," he said. "Lock the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone except me or Garrett. There's food in the cabinet by the window. Water in the pitcher. I'll be back as soon as I'm done." "What are you going to do?" His smile was sharp enough to cut. "I'm going to explain to the council exactly what happens when someone calls my mate property." He strode toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. "Lyra, yes. When I come back, we're going to have a conversation about your father's debt. All of it. The documents, the terms, everything. I want to see the contract you signed." She nodded mutely. Theron left, closing the door behind him with deliberate gentleness. Lyra stood frozen in the middle of the room until she heard his footsteps fade down the corridor. Then she crossed to the door and slid the heavy iron bolt home. The lock clicking into place was the loneliest sound she'd ever heard. The great hall looked different in morning light. The wreckage from last night's feast had been cleaned away with brutal efficiency. The broken chalice, the bloodstains, the spilled wine, all of it scrubbed from existence as if it had never been. Long tables had been pushed against the walls. The space in front of the high table stood empty, a stage waiting for its players. Theron entered from the main doors, Garrett a half step behind him. Every member of the council was present, 12 lords in their formal robes arranged in a semicircle facing the throne. Lord Castellan stood at the center, a sheaf of parchment in his gnarled hands. The old lord had recovered his composure since last night. His silver beard was freshly combed. His robes were immaculate. He looked every inch the respected counselor, the trusted advisor, the voice of reason in a court gone mad. It made Theron want to rip his throat out. My king. Castellan bowed the gesture just deep enough to be respectful, just shallow enough to convey subtle disapproval. Thank you for joining us. I realize the hour is early, but the matter is urgent. Theron didn't sit on the throne. He remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed in a way that made every warrior in the room tense. You invoked the right of address, Theron said. Speak. Castellan lifted the parchment. Last night you removed a bonded servant from my custody. Omega Designation 7 currently serving a 15-year contract to settle her late father's debts. According to the terms of said contract, she is legally bound to my household until the debt of 4,200 gold crowns is satisfied. He gestured to the other council members. These lords witnessed the signing of the contract 7 years ago, when the girl came of age to enter service. The terms are clear and legally binding. By taking her from my service without payment or permission, you have violated territorial contract law. I see. Theron's voice was mild, almost pleasant. And what remedy does the law prescribe for such a violation? Return of the bonded individual plus compensation for breach of contract. Standard penalty is double the remaining debt value. Castellan smiled thinly. In this case, 33,600 gold crowns. I'm willing to waive the penalty, of course, if the girl is returned immediately. Murmurs rippled through the assembled lords. 33,000 gold crowns was a staggering sum, enough to bankrupt a minor lord. Castellan was making a point. Even the king was not above the law. Interesting, Theron said. Tell me, Castellan, this contract you were waving about. Did Lyra sign it herself? She was 7 years old when her father died. Obviously, she couldn't sign legal documents. I signed as executor of the Silvermane estate, acting in her best interest. Acting in her best interest. Theron let the words hang. By selling her into 15 years of unpaid labor. By preventing the total collapse of a noble house. Castellan's voice hardened. The girl's father died with massive debts. I could have claimed the estate entirely. Instead, I offered a path to redemption. The contract is generous given the circumstances. Generous. Theron took a step forward. Just one. Every guard in the room shifted weight. Walk me through the generosity, Castellan. The part where you worked her 16 hours a day. The part where you called her by a number instead of her name. The part where your daughter held her wrist over boiling water until her skin melted. The hall went very quiet. Castellan's eyes narrowed. My king, don't know what lies the girl has told you, but are you calling me a liar? The question was soft, deadly. Castellan seemed to realize he'd stepped onto thin ice. Of course not, my king. I merely suggest that a servant, especially one seeking to escape her legal obligations, might exaggerate or misrepresent. Garrett. The second stepped forward. My king. How many servants do we have in Stonehaven? 417, my lord. And how many of them have burned scars shaped like handprints? How many have chemical burns from lye soap? How many flinch when someone walks past them? Garrett's expression was stone. I couldn't say, my king, but I could find out. Please do. I want a full accounting. Every servant, every injury, every incident. I want to know exactly what's been happening in my fortress while I was busy defending its borders. He turned back to Castellan. But we're getting distracted. You came here to talk about contracts. So let's talk about contracts. Specifically the contract between Lord Aldrich Silvermane and yourself. The one where he supposedly borrowed 4,200 gold crowns. Theron held out his hand. Show it to me. Castellan shifted his weight. My king, the original loan agreement, the one Aldrich signed, you do have it, don't you? You wouldn't create a binding labor contract based on a debt without proper documentation. The original document was lost in a fire at my estate 3 years ago. The copy is worthless. Theron smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Any first-year law clerk knows that labor contracts require proof of original debt. No proof, no contract. Which means Lyra has been working for you illegally for 3 years. The color drained from Castellan's face. My king, surely you're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Theron began to pace a slow circle around the empty space in front of the throne. But let's pretend for a moment that your contract is legitimate. Let's pretend that Lord Aldrich really did owe you 4,000 gold crowns. Do you know what else territorial law requires? He stopped pacing, turning to face Castellan directly. Fair compensation. The law states that bonded labor must be credited against the debt at market rate for the work performed. So tell me, Castellan, what's the market rate for a skilled servant? Someone who can work kitchen laundry and cleaning. Castellan's jaw worked silently. I'll tell you, Theron continued. 8 silver pieces per week. That's the standard wage for general servants. But Lyra wasn't general labor, was she? She was doing 3 jobs. So let's triple it. 24 silver pieces per week. He gestured to Garrett, who produced a ledger from his coat. My second did some math this morning. 3 years of service at 24 silver per week equals 3,744 silver pieces. Divide by 12 to convert to gold, that's 312 gold crowns. Theron's eyes glittered. Which means if your debt was real, which I'm not conceding, Lyra would have worked off 7.4% of it. Not 40%, not 20%, 7.4. At this rate, she wouldn't be free until she was 53 years old. The council members were shifting now, uncomfortable murmurs spreading. Unless, Theron said softly, the debt was never real in the first place. Unless this whole thing was just a convenient way to acquire a servant and strip a noble house of its heir. Castellan's face had gone purple. My king, these accusations are well documented. Garrett held up the ledger. I took the liberty of reviewing the territorial records this morning. Lord Aldrich Silvermane's finances at the time of his death showed no outstanding debts. In fact, the Silvermane silver mines were producing record yields. He had no need to borrow money. Now that's impossible. I have the documents. You have forgeries. Theron's voice cut like a blade. Which means you've been holding Lyra under false contract. Which means every day of her service has been illegal. Which means by my count, you owe her 3 years of back wages plus damages for unlawful imprisonment. He smiled coldly. I'm putting the total at 10,000 gold crowns. You have 30 days to pay, or I'll seize your estates to cover it. Castellan stared, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. You can't, this is the council will never. The council will do exactly as I say. Theron's voice dropped to a growl. Because I am the king, and you are a man who just made the mistake of calling my mate property. The word hung in the air. Mate, every person in the hall heard it. The implications crashed over them like a wave. Not just a servant, not just a whim. Mate. Lord Castellan seemed to age 10 years in an instant. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Theron turned to the assembled lords. Let me be very clear about what happened last night. I didn't claim Lyra on impulse. I claimed her because she is mine in every way that matters. The mate bond has been acknowledged. By this time tomorrow, it will be completed. He let that sink in. Which means anyone who harms her, threatens her, or speaks against her is committing treason. Not against a servant, against the future queen of the Northern Territories. The silence was absolute. Now, Theron's voice was almost conversational. Does anyone else want to discuss contracts, debts, legal obligations? No one spoke. Excellent. Garrett, escort Lord Castellan to his chambers. He'll need time to arrange his finances. And Castellan, Theron's eyes flashed gold. If you go anywhere near Lyra again, I'll consider it a declaration of war. And we both know how those end for you. The old lord left, flanked by guards, his shoulders bowed, the parchment clutched uselessly in his hands. The other council members filtered out in silence, none of them willing to meet Theron's eyes. When the hall was finally empty, Garrett stepped up beside his king. That went well, the second said dryly. Theron's laugh was short and humorless. Castellan's going to retaliate. He won't accept this. He can't. If Lyra is recognized as legitimate heir to Silvermane, she can reclaim the estates. The silver mines alone are worth more than everything he owns. So what's the play? We move fast. I want those estates secured by the end of the week. I want the Silvermane family records pulled from archive, and I want a full investigation into Aldrich's death. Garrett nodded slowly. You think Castellan killed him? I think it's a remarkable coincidence that Aldrich died in a hunting accident the same year his mines hit peak production. I think it's convenient that all the original financial records were lost in a fire. And I think a man who would hold a child's wrist over boiling water is capable of a lot worse. I'll start the investigation. Quietly. I don't want Castellan spooked before we have evidence. Theron ran a hand through his hair. How long until the mate bond rumors spread? They already have. Every servant in the fortress was talking about it by dawn. By tonight, it'll be all over the territory. Good. Let them talk. Let everyone know that she's under my protection. Theron started toward the door, then paused. Garrett. Yeah. Thank you for the ledger work, for the research, for having my back. Garrett's expression softened fractionally. Always, brother. Always. Theron climbed the 7 flights of stairs back to his chambers faster than he probably should have. His wolf was pacing anxious, demanding to know that their mate was safe. The separation, even for an hour, felt like broken glass grinding in his chest. He reached his door and knocked softly. Lyra, it's me. The bolt slid back. The door opened a crack, and one gray-blue eye peered out. When she saw it was really him, she pulled the door open fully. Are you all right? The question came out simultaneously from both of them. Lyra almost smiled. I'm fine. I ate something, drank water, paced a lot. I'm sorry I left you alone. Theron stepped inside, closing and bolting the door behind him. Castellan isn't going to be a problem anymore. The contract is void. The debt is forgiven. You're free. She stared at him. Free? Legally, yes. Practically. He ran a hand over his face. Castellan's not going to let this go. He's going to try something, which is why I need you to stay close, at least until we can figure out what game he's playing. Lyra nodded slowly. She looked small in the too large nightgown, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, her bandaged wrist cradled against her chest. Beautiful, his wolf whispered. Ours. There's something else, Theron said. Something I need to tell you. About why finding you matters so much. About what happens if we don't complete the mate bond. Lyra sat down on the edge of the bed, watching him with those steady gray-blue eyes. Waiting. Theron took a breath and began to explain about the shadow poison, about the wolf howling in his head, about the 6 months he had left before the controls shattered and he became the monster everyone feared, about how her scent, her presence, was the only thing that made the pain stop. And when he was done, she reached out and took his hand. Then we complete the bond, she said simply, as if it was the easiest decision in the world. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality that felt nothing like the life Lyra had known. She didn't return to the servant quarters. She didn't light kitchen fires or scrub floors or haul water up 7 flights of stairs with arms that shook from exhaustion. Instead, she woke each morning in fur and soft linen, ate food that was warm and plentiful, and spent her hours in rooms where the cold couldn't reach. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Theron kept his distance, though she could tell it cost him. He slept in a chair by the fire rather than the bed, despite her awkward offer to take the floor. He brought her meals himself, refusing to let servants enter the room. He spent hours sitting by the window, watching the snow fall, while his wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin. At night, she could hear him talking to himself, or rather, talking to the wolf, his voice low and strained, bargaining with the beast inside him for just a little more control, just a little more time. On the second day, Garrett brought clothes. Real clothes, not servant rags. Dresses in deep greens and grays, soft leather boots that actually fit a cloak lined with rabbit fur. Lyra ran her fingers over the fabric and tried not to think about how much it all cost, how impossible it would be to repay. They're gifts, Theron said when he saw her expression. You don't owe anyone anything. Not anymore. But debt wasn't something you could just forgive away. Lyra had learned that lesson too well. On the 3rd day, Iris came to visit. The head servant was a woman carved from practicality and hard-won wisdom. At 45, she'd survived 3 different regimes at Stonehaven, outlasted 2 councils, and knew every secret the fortress walls could hold. When Theron opened the door to find her standing there with a basket of medicinal herbs, he looked ready to refuse entry. She needs another woman to talk to, Iris said bluntly, and those bandages need changing. You can stand there glowering, my king, or you can let me do my job. Theron stepped aside. Iris entered the room and took one look at Lyra sitting stiffly on the edge of the bed, then turned to the king. Out. Excuse me. You heard me. Out. Girl talk. Private. You can lurk in the hallway if it makes you feel better, but you're not staying in here. For a moment, Theron looked like he might argue. Then his eyes met Lyra's, and something in her expression made him nod slowly. I'll be right outside, he said. If you need anything, we'll holler, Iris interrupted. Now shoo. The door closed behind him. Iris waited until his footsteps retreated a few paces down the corridor, then turned to Lyra with an expression that was equal parts concern and exasperation. Child, she said, you look like you're waiting to be executed. Lyra tried to smile. It felt wrong on her face. I'm fine. You're about as fine as a rabbit in a wolf's den. Iris set the basket down and crossed her arms. Talk to me. What's going on in that head of yours? I don't... Lyra stopped. Started again. I don't understand what's happening. 3 days ago, I was Omega-7. I scrubbed your floors. I ate your leftover bread. I knew exactly what my life was going to look like for the next 12 years. And now I'm the king's mate, Iris finished gently, acknowledged in front of the entire court. But I'm not. The words burst out before Lyra could stop them. I'm not his mate. I can't be. I'm nobody. I'm a debt servant with chemical burns and no family and no future. Kings don't. People like him. Don't. She pressed her hands to her face, fighting back the burn in her throat. Iris sat down beside her on the bed. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then let me tell you something about that man out there. Something most people don't know. Lyra lowered her hands. 5 years ago, Iris said quietly, Theron was ambushed during a border patrol. Shadow poison straight to the heart. The kind of dark magic that's been outlawed for a century. Should have killed him instantly. Instead, it just started eating him from the inside out. She looked toward the door as if she could see through it to where Theron stood guard. Every day since then, his wolf has been dying, screaming, clawing at his mind until he can't sleep, can't rest, can't find a moment of peace. The healers told him 2 years ago that he'd go feral, that he'd lose himself completely, that we'd have to put him down like a rabid dog. Lyra's breath caught. He's been living on borrowed time, Iris continued, holding on through sheer stubborn will. And then you bled on his floor, and for the first time in 5 years, his wolf went quiet. The older woman turned to meet Lyra's eyes. So no child. You're not nobody. You're the woman who gave our king his first night of peaceful sleep in half a decade. You're the mate bond that's keeping him alive. And whether you think you deserve it or not, you're exactly what he needs. Lyra's hands twisted in her lap. What if I can't? What if I'm not strong enough? What if the bond doesn't hold? Then we deal with it. Together. Iris reached over and squeezed her shoulder. But you're stronger than you think. Anyone who survived 3 years under Castellan's thumb, who kept their humanity intact despite everything that man put you through, that's not weakness, Lyra. That's steel wrapped in skin. She stood and retrieved the basket. Now let me look at that wrist. And then you're going to eat a proper meal because you're still too thin and it's making me nervous. The bandages came off carefully. The wound had closed cleanly, already healing faster than it should. Iris made a small sound of approval. Alpha healing, she murmured. It's starting already. The bond's affecting you even without completion. Lyra stared at the pink line of new scar tissue. I thought I was Omega. So did everyone else. But I've been doing this job for 23 years and I know alpha healing when I see it. Iris applied fresh salve, her touch gentle and efficient. The question is, why were you presenting as Omega? That kind of suppression doesn't happen naturally. The words were out before Lyra could think better of them. Wolfsbane, in my food, every morning for 12 years. Iris's hands stilled. When she looked up, her expression was murderous. 12 years. 3 drops. Every breakfast. Starting when I was 10. Lyra heard her own voice as if from a distance. Castellan knew I was alpha. He was afraid I'd claim the Silvermane estates when I came of age. So he made sure I'd never shift. Never know what I really was. That bastard. Iris's voice shook with fury. That absolute bastard. Do you know what Wolfsbane does to a developing wolf? The permanent damage. I know. Lyra pulled her hand back, flexing her fingers. I felt it every day. The emptiness where my wolf should have been. Like part of my soul was missing. Iris was quiet for a long moment. Then she finished wrapping the clean bandages with brisk, angry movements. Theron needs to know, she said finally, about the poison, about all of it. He already knows some of it. Then he needs to know the rest. Because Castellan didn't just steal your labor child. He stole 12 years of your life. He tried to murder your wolf before it ever woke. Iris's eyes were hard as flint. That's not just contract fraud. That's attempted annihilation of a bloodline. And there are laws about that, old laws, the kind written in blood. A knock at the door interrupted them. Theron's voice, carefully controlled. Is everything all right? Iris rolled her eyes. We're fine, my king. Just gossiping about the weather and braiding each other's hair. Silence. Then I heard raised voices. That was me being angry about things that aren't your concern yet. Give us 5 more minutes. Footsteps retreated again. Iris turned back to Lyra and lowered her voice. Listen to me. I know you're scared. I know this is all happening too fast. But that man out there, he's not going to hurt you. He's not going to use you. He's barely holding himself together as it is, and the only thing keeping him sane is knowing you're safe. She gripped Lyra's hands. So when he asks about the bond, and he will ask, you need to decide what you want. Not what you think you should want, not what's proper or expected. What you actually want. Because this is your choice, Lyra. It's always been your choice. After Iris left, Lyra sat alone with her thoughts. What did she want? 3 days ago, the answer would have been simple. Freedom, distance, enough silver to disappear into the free territories and never look back. But now sitting in a room that smelled like pine smoke and rain, wearing clothes that fit, and eating food that didn't taste like ash, she wasn't sure anymore. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, blanketing the fortress in white. From this height, she could see the entire inner courtyard. Guards walked their patrols. Servants hurried between buildings. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. This had been her prison for 3 years. But it had also been her home. The door opened behind her. Lyra didn't turn. She knew his footsteps by now, the particular rhythm of his walk. Theron crossed the room and stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could feel his warmth, far enough that she didn't feel trapped. "Iris says you told her about the wolfsbane," he said quietly. Lyra nodded. 12 years is a long time to poison someone. His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the wolf growling underneath, especially a child. "I survived. That's not the same thing as being okay." She finally turned to face him. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, new lines around his mouth. The legendary control was fraying at the edges. "Are you okay?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise him. "Me? You haven't slept in 3 days, you barely eat. You sit in that chair every night talking to your wolf like you're negotiating a hostage situation." She took a step toward him. "Iris told me about the shadow poison, about what it's doing to you." Theron's jaw tightened. She had no right. She had every right. "I'm supposed to be your mate, aren't I? That means I should know what I'm walking into." "You don't have to walk into anything." The words came out rough, strained. "I meant what I said before. You have choices. If you want to leave, I'll give you enough gold to start over anywhere in the territories. New name, new life, complete freedom. You don't owe me anything just because I happened to claim you at a feast." Lyra studied his face, the careful way he wasn't looking at her, the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip he had on his own self-control. "What do you want?" she asked. "It doesn't matter what I—" "Yes, it does. You keep asking me what I want, so I'm asking you. What do you want, Theron?" He closed his eyes. A muscle jumped in his jaw. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want you to stay. I want to complete the bond. I want to fall asleep knowing you're safe and wake up with your scent on my skin. I want—" He stopped, breathed, continued. "I want to not be alone anymore. I want my wolf to stop screaming. I want just one thing in my life that isn't duty or death or the weight of a crown I never asked for." His eyes opened, meeting hers. "I want you, Lyra, in every way that matters, for however long you'll have me." The honesty in his voice was a physical thing, raw and real and absolutely devastating. "But," he continued, "I also want you to choose this because you want it. Not because you feel obligated, not because you're afraid, not because some ancient bond is telling you to. So I'm asking one more time, what do you want?" Lyra thought about 3 years of being invisible, of being Omega-7, a number instead of a name, of saving silver pieces and planning escapes and believing that freedom meant running away from everything. She thought about the way Theron looked at her, like she mattered, like she was worth kneeling for in front of 300 witnesses. She thought about the wolf inside her, the one that had been sleeping for 12 years starting to wake up, stretching, recognizing something in him that felt like home. "I want to stop being afraid," she said slowly. "I want to stop waiting for someone to rip this away from me. I want to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'm allowed to have something good." She took another step forward, close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "And I want you," she said. "I want to know what it feels like to matter to someone, to be chosen instead of owned, to wake up next to someone who sees me as a person instead of property." Her hand came up trembling slightly and touched his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating hard and fast. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I want this. I want you." Theron's hand covered hers. His palm was warm, calloused from years of sword work. His eyes had gone gold again, but this time there was no violence in the color. Just heat, just want. "Are you sure?" His voice was gravel. "Because once we start this, I'm not going to be able to stop. The bond, it's going to change everything." "I'm sure." He searched her face for a long moment, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that she was saying what she thought he wanted to hear, rather than what she actually felt. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he smiled. A real smile, the first she'd ever seen from him. It transformed his face from stern to something almost beautiful. Then we do this properly, he said. Not here. Not in a room that still smells like fear and uncertainty. I'm going to take you somewhere better. Where? The old stone circle, up in the mountains. It's where the first alphas used to complete their bonds back before there were fortresses or councils or politics. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. It's sacred ground, the kind of place where promises actually mean something. When? Tomorrow night. Full moon, I'll arrange everything. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, the gesture formal and achingly gentle. Until then, try to rest. Eat. Let yourself believe that this is real. That night, Lyra actually slept in the bed while Theron kept watch by the fire. But sometime in the deepest part of darkness, she woke to find him standing by the window, his forehead pressed against the cold glass. Theron. He didn't turn. Go back to sleep. She slipped out from under the furs and padded across the room. This close, she could see the tension radiating through his entire frame. His hands were braced against the window frame, knuckles white. Talk to me, she said softly. It's nothing, just the wolf. Theron's voice broke. He wants you, wants the bond complete, wants to claim and protect Antoine. A sound escaped him, half growl, half whimper. I'm holding on, he gritted out. But it's getting harder. The control, every hour without the bond completed feels like broken glass in my head. Lyra did something that would have been unthinkable 4 days ago. She reached out and touched his back, just her palm flat against his shoulder blade. He went completely still. One more day, she said. You can hold on for one more day. And if I can't, then I'll be here to remind you who you are, to pull you back. She moved closer until she could rest her forehead against his spine. You're not alone anymore, Theron. Remember? She felt him shudder. Felt the wolf inside him settle just slightly, soothed by her touch, her scent, her presence. One more day, he repeated. I can do that. They stood like that until dawn. Lyra's hand on his back, Theron's head bowed against the window, both of them holding on to control by their fingernails. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and in the lower levels of the fortress, Lord Castellan sat in his chambers, staring at maps and contracts and ledgers planning his next move. Because powerful men didn't surrender easily, and they certainly didn't forgive public humiliation. The following evening, as the sun began to set and the full moon rose over the mountains, Garrett came to the king's chambers with unexpected news. We have a problem, he said without preamble. One of the kitchen servants just confessed to Iris. She's been adding wolfsbane to Lyra's meals for the past 3 days, on Castellan's orders. Theron's eyes flashed gold. How much? Not enough to kill, just enough to keep her wolf suppressed, to prevent her from being able to shift or complete the bond. Garrett's expression was grim. He's trying to keep her dependent on you, but unable to actually fulfill the mate bond. Which means I'll go feral, Theron finished. And when I do, the council will have cause to execute me for being a threat to the territory. Lyra felt cold wash through her. He's trying to kill you both. Not kill, Theron said. Eliminate me through execution, you through permanent suppression. Then he reclaims the Silvermane estates unopposed and gets exactly what he wanted. He turned to Garrett. The servant, already in custody, singing like a bird. Apparently Castellan promised her 50 gold crowns and a position in his household if she succeeded. Good, we'll need her testimony. Theron's jaw set in a hard line. How much wolfsbane has Lyra ingested? Based on the servant's confession, 6 drops total over 3 days. Not enough to do permanent damage, but enough to delay the bond by maybe a week. Theron looked at Lyra, his expression carefully controlled. How do you feel? She did a mental inventory. Tired, a little dizzy. I thought it was just nerves. It's the poison. Your body's trying to fight it off, but without a fully awakened wolf, you don't have the healing factor you need. He turned back to Garrett. Is there an antidote? Alpha blood. The more powerful the alpha, the better the antidote. Garrett's eyes flicked between them. Which means you need to complete the bond, tonight, before the poison builds up anymore. I thought we had until tomorrow, Lyra said. The stone circle, the ceremony? We did, but that was before Castellan decided to poison you again. Theron's hands clenched into fists. He's forcing our hand, making us rush this. Or, Garrett said quietly, he's giving you exactly the excuse you needed to stop overthinking it. Theron shot him a look. Not helpful. Actually, I think it is. The second crossed his arms. You've been pacing around each other for 3 days, both terrified to take the next step. Maybe this is the universe telling you to stop waiting for the perfect moment and just do it. The perfect moment, Theron said through gritted teeth, is not when she's been poisoned and I'm half feral with need. There's never a perfect moment, Lyra heard herself say. Both men turned to look at her. There's just now, and I'm choosing now. Theron searched her face. You're sure because once we start, I'm sure. She held out her hand. Take me to the stone circle. Let's finish this. He took her hand, his grip warm and solid and absolutely certain. Then we ride, he said. Garrett, have horses prepared and send word to Iris. Tell her to meet us at the circle with whatever supplies she thinks we'll need. Already done, Garrett said with a slight smile. I had a feeling you'd say that. An hour later, Lyra sat on horseback behind Theron, her arms wrapped around his waist as they climbed the mountain path toward the ancient stone circle. The full moon lit their way, turning the snow-covered landscape into something out of a winter tale. Behind them, 4 guards followed at a discreet distance. Ahead, the standing stones waited. And inside Lyra, deep in the place where her wolf had slept for 12 years, something finally began to wake. The stone circle rose from the mountain like the bones of an ancient god. 12 standing stones, each twice the height of a man, arranged in a perfect ring around a flat expanse of granite that glittered with embedded quartz. The full moon hung directly overhead, so bright it cast shadows sharp as knives. Snow had been swept from the center of the circle, revealing symbols carved into the rock. Old runes that predated the fortress, predated the councils, predated everything but the wolves themselves. Theron dismounted first, then reached up to help Lyra down. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the moonlight, his eyes were pure molten gold. This is where it happens, he said quietly. Every Alpha King for the last 300 years has completed their bond here. The stones remember. They witness. Lyra looked around the circle. The guards had stopped at the tree line, far enough away to give privacy, but close enough to respond if needed. Iris stood near one of the stones, a leather satchel at her feet, her expression unreadable. What do I do? Lyra asked. You trust me. Theron took her hand, leading her to the center of the circle. And you let go. He turned to face her, both of her hands now clasped in his. The wind had died completely. The only sound was their breathing and the faint hum of power that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. Lyra of House Silvermane, Theron said, his voice carrying the weight of ritual. I claim you as my mate, my equal, my queen. Do you accept this claim? She looked up at him, at the scars on his jaw, the shadows under his eyes, the desperate hope written across every line of his face. At the man who had knelt in blood for her, who had paid her fake debts and defended her before councils and stayed awake for 3 nights just to keep her safe. I accept, she whispered. The stones pulsed with light. Theron's eyes flashed brighter. Then we seal the bond, my blood to yours, your wolf to mine. He raised his wrist to his mouth and bit down. Blood welled up dark against his pale skin. He held it out to her. Lyra didn't hesitate. She pressed her lips to the wound and drank. The effect was instantaneous. Power flooded through her veins like lightning made liquid. The wolfsbane that had suppressed her for 12 years burned away in seconds, consumed by the pure alpha strength of Theron's blood. And beneath it, rising from the place where it had slept for so long, her wolf finally woke. Lyra gasped and pulled back. Theron caught her as her legs gave out. Let it happen, he murmured against her hair. Don't fight it. Your wolf knows what to do. The pain hit like a hammer. Her bones began to reshape, crack, and reform. But this time she didn't scream, because underneath the pain was something else, something that felt like coming home. Light exploded from her body, not gold like Theron's, not silver like normal wolves. Violet, pure, brilliant violet mixed with shimmering white. Her wolf surged forward and Lyra finally let go of being human. The transformation was agony and ecstasy combined. Bones lengthened, muscles reformed. Fur erupted across her skin in a wave of pure white, and when it was done, when she stood on 4 legs instead of 2, she was magnificent. The white wolf of House Silvermane, larger than any normal wolf, larger even than Theron in his shifted form. Her fur was the color of fresh snow, but it shimmered with an inner light as if starlight had been woven into each strand. Her eyes blazed violet, the color of ancient power of bloodlines thought extinct. Theron shifted in response. His black wolf was massive, scarred, powerful. But when he saw her, truly saw her in her full glory, he dropped his head in submission. The Alpha King bowing to his queen. Lyra's wolf rumbled not in dominance but in acceptance. She moved forward, pressing her muzzle against his. The bond snapped into place with an almost audible click, and suddenly she could feel everything he felt. The relief, the wonder, the love. They ran. Through the snow, down the mountain, their wolves finally free, finally together. The guards scrambled out of their way. Behind them, Iris smiled. When they shifted back to human an hour later, both breathless and laughing, the bond marks were visible on their necks. Golden for him, violet for her, permanent and perfect. "My queen," Theron said, pulling her against his chest. "My king," she replied, and kissed him until the moon began to set. The great hall had been transformed. Where Lord Castellan and Lady Isolde once sat in judgment, new council members now gathered. Garrett at Theron's right hand, Iris overseeing a staff that no longer lived in fear. And at the center of it all, on a throne that had been built specifically for her, sat Lyra. Not Omega-7, not the debt servant, not the invisible girl who scrubbed floors and hid scars. Queen Lyra of House Silvermane, the White Wolf, mate to the Alpha King. The trial had been brief. Castellan's crimes were too numerous, too well documented. Murder, fraud, poisoning, attempted destruction of a bloodline. The evidence was overwhelming. He died in exile alone in the wildlands exactly as he deserved. Isolde lived, but with a silver collar locked around her throat, her wolf permanently caged, her beauty fading in the dungeons where she would spend the rest of her natural life. Justice public and absolute. The Silvermane estates had been restored. The silver mines reopened, and with the fortune they generated, Lyra had built something new. A sanctuary for wolves who had been broken, suppressed, abused. A place where Omega and Alpha alike could heal. Iris ran it. Martha Iris Lyra corrected herself, still getting used to using the name the older woman had chosen, ran it with fierce compassion and zero tolerance for cruelty. 300 wolves had found safety there in 2 months. 300 lives changed. "You're thinking too loud," Theron murmured from beside her. Lyra smiled and turned to him. "Just counting blessings." His hand found hers, their bond marks glowing faintly where their skin touched. "Count faster. We have a kingdom to run." She laughed. The sound echoed through the hall, bright and free. Outside, snow continued to fall on Stonehaven Fortress. But inside, for the first time in memory, it was warm. The White Wolf had awakened. The kingdom had healed. And the girl who had been nothing became everything.